I sure didn't see that. But that happened to me, you know. I'm not a Bigfoot hunter. I don't go out in the woods looking for a Bigfoot. I accidentally ran across one out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and if I ran into a bear, I would be just as afraid. But getting back to your question about, you know, if I had run into anything that you had described, I recently divorced, but back when I was married, my ex-wife's daughter had lost her father, and there wasn't a great relationship between the two of them. And he had passed away suddenly. And that next day, I was getting mumbling in my ear at work, and I had a feeling I knew what it was, but it was one of those things where I kept texting my ex and saying, you know, what do I do? And she said, well, just, you know, try to listen, try to understand, accept it. And as soon as I did that, I heard very clearly in my ear, tell her I'm sorry. And I didn't know why he would come to me. But I relayed that message along, and we never heard from him again. It was a very personal thing, a very emotional thing. And it really, honestly, I think, helped her daughter heal at the time. Because, like I said, there was not a real good relationship there. And she did attend the memorial service. It was a difficult thing for her, but I think in the end she was happy that she went, and I was able to be a part of that, a small part of that, and being able to pass that message along. And before folks are listening are like, well, he's a psychic medium. I don't consider myself that. There's probably been about 4 or 5 times in the 10.5 years that I've done this where I've gotten some sort of sign, some sort of message. And I've always said that being a medium, I think it comes with a lot of responsibility, and I don't think I'm ready for that responsibility. So it's one of those things where I hesitate to fully embrace it. So, but yeah, that was an emotional experience, one that I'm, you know, quite honestly happy I was able to be a part of and give her the message.
Well, you know, I have had some actual mediums tell me, you know, through the past year, almost a year and a half doing the show now, that, you know, sometimes they have a client there and they're doing what they're doing, and the client leaves, and whatever they were, you know, discussing or whatever they were, you know, doing, all of a sudden it started becoming part of her life. And now she has her own family, her own, you know, kids and husband to deal with. And now, you know, she has this entity, you know, that isn't leaving her alone for a while, like transferred to her. And I just haven't heard that from 1 or 2 people, mediums and psychics. I've heard it from quite a few of them where they have those cases. So maybe you're better not getting that deep into that situation, where, because it could really mess you up from talking to them, that it really has caused a lot of, you know, emotional problems, even family-wise, because they're carrying a load of, you know, other things on them.
I mean, like I talked about earlier in the show, you know, just being a paranormal investigator and doing what we do, we put ourselves at risk of things following us. I can't imagine the added pressure and responsibility of being a medium. I have a lot of respect for the folks that do that. I have very good friends that are mediums, and yeah, this just that's a whole lot more responsibility than I think I can handle at this point.
Well, yeah. Now, you know, the only thing I ever did here back when you know, Art Bell's the one that got me back into broadcasting. I was retired. And, you know, one day, this is going back around October last year, he called me up out of the blue, and we just started talking. He goes, you know, instead of riding your motorcycle so much, why don't you get back on, you know, and do a talk show again? And, you know, I gave it thought, and I go, hey, you know, he's right. And, you know, I did paranormal when I first started broadcasting or if you could call it paranormal, back in the mid 70s. We did shows on ghosts and things like witchcraft and stuff like that, but not like how it is today, and we did Bigfoot type of stuff. But, one of the first things I did here when I started, doing the show again is we have a cemetery close by where I live. It goes back to around the 1870s something. And I was out there with one of my sons, and it was late at night. We were walking in this lonely old cemetery, and it is old. And I had my recorder going. And, I didn't hear anything. Of course, again, my hearing is not as good as somebody in their 20s. But we got home, and I started, hearing like a kid, like playing type of sound, like, making noises and stuff like that, and, laughing and all that stuff. And I said, oh, wow, I got a recording. Well, one of my friends who, was a ghost hunter said, well, go back during the day, And, we went back during the day, and the back part of the cemetery, maybe 40 to 100 feet, there was a bunch of fir trees, where you couldn't see really through it. Well, after we walked in through that, we came up to a person's house that had a trampoline, and that's where that recording sound came from. And boy, it made me feel like an idiot.
Yeah, there's been times I've been fooled by things too, and I think it happens to all of us. And, one in particular, just to show you how sound can be distorted inside of a home. We did an investigation of a home, a 2-story home, open concept, vaulted ceiling, and we had a recorder in one of the bedrooms upstairs and a recorder in the living room. We had taken a break and had let the family's dog out to go to the bathroom. And on the recorder upstairs, one of my team members had sent me, a timestamp on the recorder that I'd given them, and said, you have to go listen to this. It's threatening their daughter. And he told me what he thought it said, and the power of suggestion is very powerful. And I went and I listened to it, and sure enough, it sounded as if a spirit was saying something about, I'll get you and your daughter. And immediately my heart sank. But we always cross-reference every recorder that we have running. And we found that on the living room recorder at that exact time, it was me talking to the family dog saying, in essence, you're a good dog. But upstairs and around the corner, it sounded like I was making threats to the family. Just amazing how sound can be distorted just in that little space, that little time. Had we not done our due diligence and cross-reference, we would have made that situation far more worse than it was. And we were eventually able to trace that one down to the client's brother.
Oh, yeah. Even like with my equipment here in my studio, I run 7 computers to do this show. Actually, 6 computers, then it goes into a server. But then I have a rack of a whole bunch of equipment, a preamp, speech processor, compressor, equalizer, and a bunch of other stuff. Because we send it out, through the server and then all through the different apps. And pretty soon, guys, we're going to be also on terrestrial radio stations. But one night here, a couple weeks ago, all of a sudden, I was doing my show. And, I had my headphones on. It wasn't coming through the headphones. But I have a set of monitor speakers here, which were totally turned off. They weren't even plugged into any of the mixers. It wasn't plugged into the computer. All of a sudden, I heard talking. And I'm interviewing somebody, and I'm realizing this talking has nothing to do with, the interview. And then I started listening more and more, and somebody's sitting there saying, well, I love you. When can we meet? And all this stuff. I started getting, wow, this is kind of really weird. Well, it turned out to be the neighbor behind us with one of their phones or whatever. It was somehow getting picked up with all this equipment, probably not shielded the way it should be. And I tell you, it was kind of eerie on that.
we have had instances where we carry around walkie-talkies, and sometimes you get feedback. Sometimes you catch other conversations, and these things will just start talking without any warning, and it can be startling. But we've had a couple where folks are talking back and forth, and as soon as we enter the conversation, there's a pause, and then we don't hear from them again. So there's many different factors that go into what we do, and you really have to have a good head on your shoulders and be able to think about things logically.
Oh yeah, one just going into it, because I look at when I bring a guest on, we're just talking like you were in my living room, and we're just talking about the paranormal. But I had a guest on here recently that had a whole bunch of audio clips. Okay, and it was really bad. I debunked, and I should have not even had him on the show. I started running I got a program here. I can analyze stuff. I'm sure you guys have programs to, when you get sounds, you analyze it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I started analyzing these sounds, and it turned out to be not anything the way he had it recorded, or the way whatever he did to it. After I started running, the program through it, and then I started playing around with the equalizer with it, all of a sudden it started saying, "Did I do it okay, Dad? Will that work for you?" And I'm going, "Wow." And it didn't sound like, when I cleaned it up, nothing like what he, sent over and said that he encountered in the woods. So,
yeah, it's something where you definitely have to you have to be willing to accept the fact that what you first thought is not what it is, and leave your ego at the door. There's been times where I've listened back to audio and thought that we had gotten something, and then when you go back and you, like I said, you cross-reference and you realize, that's not it at all. You have to check your ego and you have to check your ego and be willing to accept the fact that you just didn't get anything, and that's okay.
Well, I got somebody texting me right now. They're asking, what was the most scariest situation you have been into while you were into somebody's house investigating?
Scariest situation? I think it goes back to that case I was talking about earlier in the show, where we worked on it for 2 years with the foster father molesting and murdering his foster child. The last night we were in there with Scotty Rourke, with the team itself, Todd, Amy, Ian, and Miranda. There were 6 of us there that night. We were dealing with the spirit of this old man, and we had moved along the young boy earlier in the night, and Scotty had warned us that there was a good chance that the man was going to come back and not be happy. Todd and I and Miranda were upstairs, and Scotty was in the basement with the other 2 members of the team. And he called us in the walkie, and he said, "We need you down here." I went down into the basement, and instantly the weight of the world was on my shoulders. It was so heavy in the basement. And I walked into the area that Scotty was in. He looked at me and he said, "You are too emotionally attached to this case. I can't do this alone. You have to do it." We were encountering the spirit of the older man, and he was not happy, and you could tell. And at that point, Scotty was channeling this man and speaking for him. And I'm not an advocate for provoking. I will not do it. But in this instance, I took the opportunity to tell this old man exactly what this little boy should have been able to tell him. Because I was emotionally involved in the case. It was very important to me. I wanted to help that family. Most importantly, I wanted to help the spirit of this little boy. So I had an argument with something that I couldn't see for probably 5 minutes. And through it all,